goes over. Questions about cadential 6/4 chords? If you came in late, what we've been discussing is triads now in second inversion. We've already talked about triads in root position, we've already talked about triads in first inversion, triads in second inversion. And the fact that you cannot just throw a second inversion triad into the middle of a piece anywhere you want. It's not the same as a root position, it's not the same as a first inversion, it's very specific. And so the first type of way we are going to use this is called a cadential 1/6/4. And it goes in front of a 5. 5 wants to go to 1. The next type of way we would see the 6/4 chords used is what they call a passing 6/4. All right, we haven't talked about non-chord tones, but we will very soon. And to me, passing 6/4 sounds a lot, or the idea of it, the name passing, is, for me, reminds me of what we call a passing tone, right? So if I have a G chord, say 2 beats, and my melody does this. Right? G chord is GBD. G is a chord tone, that's the root. B is a chord tone, that's the third. A is a non-chord tone. We haven't talked about non-chord tones yet, but we will very soon. That A, because it starts a step below it and it moves to a step above it, we would call this a passing tone, because it passes from one note to the next and it's in the middle, right? And the same can happen if you're going down the scale. The B is a chord tone, the G is a chord tone, the A then is a passing tone. It's in between chord tones as they move by step, all right? Passing chord, or a passing 6/4 chord, does the same thing. The movement that you're looking for, the stepwise movement like this, will be in the bass though, instead. So here you have a 1 chord, and we're moving to a 1/6 chord. We throw a 5 chord in the middle. Counterpoint happening. You have the soprano going down and the bass moving up, and both moving in stepwise direction. Really good independence of parts there, contrary motion. The second example shows a 4 chord going to a 2 chord in first. They'll both be in a first inversion. You get now that could, the example they show is fine. They could have also shown 4, 6 to a 1, 6, 4 to a 4 chord. It would return to the same chord, like the first, like letter A. Starts on a 1, goes to a 5, 6, 4, and then comes back to 1 in first inversion. B shows that it's moving to another chord. But we know that 2s and 4s are really related. They're like in the same place on our chord chart. They share 2 common tones. They're very closely related. So this could also be like another way you could see this as a 4, 6 to a 1, 6, 4 to a 4, which would be this. All right. And in this example, the bass and the soprano are in harmony as they move down. And you get the counterpoint in the tenor part that's moving up with the bass, or against the soprano. And the 4 altos just get repeated. There's always going to be one voice that kind of gets shafted out of this. There's a third example that's in our newer edition. That's not, looks like it's not in this edition. And that's showing a 4 chord to a 1, 6, 4 to a 4, 6. So very similar to the first example, but instead of using one chord, it's using a 4 chord. And these are probably our most common places that you will find passing 6/4 chords. There will be a 1 chord to a 5 chord in first or second inversion, to a 1 chord in first inversion, or 1, 6 to a 5, 6, 4, back down to a 1. All right. So when you have a bass, again, we'll say in G. G is a good key for today. Our bass in the key of G. If that were our progression, 1, or maybe we don't even have regression yet, but our bass line goes G, A, B. We just want our bass to go right up the scale. This is a great way to harmonize that. Or if it's going down the scale from the third, B, A, G. The best way to show your soprano part. So the soprano that I just played, again, goes contrary to the bass. So if the soprano's on a B, move down to an A, to a G, and then back up to an A, and then to a B. So as the soprano is moving down, the bass is moving up, and as the soprano moves up, the bass is moving down. And we get this great contrary motion. And with the other. The other place that you will find this happening, very similar, but off of the 4. So you got the 4 to the 1, 6, 4 to the 4, maybe in first inversion, and that could happen going back down as well. Or in the case, you got an example that they showed in the book, like a 4, 6 to a 1, 6, 4 to a 1/6/4 to a 4/6. Although probably less common because 4 will go to 2, 2 doesn't often go to 4, but that was kind of the same type of passage. It's the same deal. Instead of G, A, D, A, G, 4 in the key of G is C, so it's gonna be C, D, E, yeah, C, oops, D, C. So the passing chord, passing 6/4 happens here as the bass moves by step, either up or step down. This whole chord, when you look at it, like say here, like this whole measure, again, really is just a 1 chord for the entire measure. 1 chord, and even though it ends on a 1/6, like the whole measure really could be thought of, this chord could really be thought of as just like, say, all non-chord tones. And you're thinking of this whole thing as G major, G, B, D, or I'm sorry, A major. A, C sharp, E, that's our 1 chord. So then we have a B, E is chord tone, G sharp non-chord tone, B non-chord tone. And you could really kind of analyze it that way if you wanted to. What we're saying though, because this forms a chord, and it happens to be the 5 chord, we're gonna call it a 5/6/4, but we're gonna put parentheses around it to indicate that it's not really, it's sort of functioning like a 5 because 5 goes to 1, but it's really just kind of a filler chord, if you think like it. And that's why we call it a passing chord, because it just kind of passes along. It's not really dragging us to 1 the way that the 5 wants to go to 1. It just kind of flows from 1 chord to the next chord. So we're calling it a passing chord, passing 6/4. And to indicate that it's a passing 6/4, we're gonna put parentheses around it to show that, because 6/4 chords do not occur that often in this style of music. And so when you have a 6/4 chord, you have to make sure that you kind of mark it a little bit more special. Yeah, so some teachers, some theorists would probably put parentheses around these notes and say that they're all non-chord tones, actually all passing tones, because A, B, C, A, G, that might be a neighbor tone, and or there, and then passing tone there. So, but since all the notes here, B, E, G sharp, B, that creates a new chord. That's just not kind of like random passing tones, but it actually creates a new chord. So we're gonna label that chord, but we're gonna show that it's a little bit more unique in this situation, and we're gonna put the parentheses around it, show that it is a passing chord. Passing 6/4.
Example 9/9.
Okay, in this example, key is C, starts on a 1/6, goes to a 4, to a 1/6, to a 4/6, to a 1/6/4, to a 2/6. So notice the bass is going from A, G to F. There's your passing, like that indicates right away, now this is a passing chord. It's not a 1/6/4 to 5, which would be cadential. Now, sometimes we see a 1/6/4, and we think, oh, that must be a cadential 1/6/4. Cadential is only gonna go to a 5. So we have a cadential 164 on the end though, 164 to 5. And it's marked that way with the bracket and the 5 underneath. Here's another example of passing 6-4.
Example 9, 10.
So you're kind of looking at the base, there is nothing written in the base, but the bottom note of the treble clef then becomes our base. And if you notice, it's just moving down by step each measure. So the first chord, E5 major triad, second chord, 5 chord, F chord with the A in the bass, to here, G, B flat, E flat, E flat, that's a 4 chord, E flat. In first inversion, to this, to 4 to 1. But the F is in the bass, not the root. So it's a 1, 6, 4. And then to our 2 chord. So our bass is going, and you get in that progression. So it's a 4, 6 to a 1, 6, 4. So if you have to analyze music, if I give you a piece of music and say analyze it, and you see a 1, 6, 4, immediately you're gonna think this is no longer a 1 chord. It has to be a special purpose to it. Is this a cadential 1, 6, 4, or is this a passing 1, 6, 4? We have one more type after that called a pedal 6, 4. But right now, passing 6, 4 means, so then what I would look for is what chord is after it. All right, 1, 6, 4, that could be cadential. No, it's not, because the 5 chord doesn't come in after it. And now I'm looking, could it be pedal? We haven't talked about pedal, but it won't be pedal because I see that this is, the bass notes are moving by step. And the 6, 4 is in between. So if you see bass notes moving by step, you have a passing 6, 4. All right, questions about a passing 6, 4 chord? All right, now the third type of 6, 4 chord that we'll discuss is a pedal 6, 4. And what did I say a pedal means? Mentioned earlier this beginning of the class. Remember?
When you just hold the bass still.
Just the bass gets held, right? So this is sort of similar to a cadential 6, 4. But what the difference being that you'll have that pedal note in the bass, the chord before the 6, 4 as well. All right, so what I mean by that. This is a good example here from the book. You look at each measure in the original. You have a key of F, you have a 1 chord, the next measure to a 5, and then to a 1. So it's pretty standard. To a 5, to a 1. Now the next 3 bars, this is elaboration. So rather than just having a 1 chord and doing nothing with it, to our 5 chord, now it sounds like more motion is happening when we're really not doing, we're not moving anywhere. but but because the chords sound like they're moving. Now again, are these new chords? You could potentially analyze this as a one chord and non-chord tones back to a one chord, or like the whole thing, the whole measure as a one chord, is what they do here. But again, because these non-chord tones make up a F, D, F, B flat, which is our 4 chord in the key of F, as a 1, 6, 4 chord. But the F is being held through all 3 chords. So you have to start with that note, it moves to a new chord, but the bass note stays the same. And then it comes back to that 1 chord again. So that would be our pedal 6/4. So the difference between the pedal and the passing, the bass is moving. Pedal, bass stays the same. And there's typically 3 chords involved, just like in a passing. Cadential, 2 chords involved. So here, looks like a cadential, and you might even be able to argue it a little bit out of this, but the fact that it starts on a 5, goes to a 1, 6, 4, and goes back to a 5, we would call that a pedal 6/4 as well. Now, if all you saw was 1, 6, 4, 5 to 1, and you didn't have that 5 in front of it, you could label that as a cadential 6/4. It's a little bit trickier with the pedal and the cadential, because it kind of serves, at least in this case, kind of serves the same function. But the fact that there was a 5 before it leads me to believe that this is a better way of describing it as a pedal. To go from 5 to 1, 6, 4, back to 5. So it's that constant note in the bass that you're hearing. Yeah, we're gonna talk about pedal point later. Pedal point, a little different than the pedal chord, because pedal point would mean that you actually kind of move through several different chords. And then you finally get back to you get to your destination. So a pedal point would be a single note. Typically in the bass, it could be a single note in the soprano. Typically though, it's in the bass, and different chords held over it, shifting around over it. Pedal 6/4 is just gonna be those 3 chords that we just talked about. Here's so again, typical progression that you'll find, again, it can happen to other chords, but typically where we're gonna find it is a 1, 6, 4, or I'm sorry, a 1 chord, and then a 4, 6, 4, back to a 1 chord. Or off of the 5, 5 to a 1, 6, 4, back to a 5. And then, of course, instead of giving you more examples of this, they love to show you the exceptions. The bass may move after the 6/4 and before the return of the root position. So in this case, we have the C in the bass, and it's our 1 chord. And then our C in the bass, and that's our 4th chord. But instead of staying on C in the bass, it actually moves. But we're still going to call that a pedal 6/4.
Example 9, 12.
So we have that C in the bass over the 1, C in the bass over the 4, or under the 4, you could say. And then rather than going back to the 1 like a typical pedal would, it moves from there. And I think, again, because this is classical style, chords are being stretched out, we held the C long enough that we could call it a pedal, and then we could move on from there, even though it doesn't return to the one like it should. In chorale style writing, I think is much more typical that you'll see, hey, that it returns back to the one. Returns back to the original chord more often than not. Oh, alright. So this example shows you a lead sheet, how you would see it in a lead sheet. I can't make it any bigger, but you have a B chord, B major chord, and then it goes to an E chord with a B in the bass, which is sort of like a sus sound, and then it goes back to the B chord.
Example 9:13.
So we do your one chord. And then to four chord, but with the B in the bass. Back to the but the B in the bass is consistent. So it was a 4-6-4 chord instead of just a regular 4. All right. Questions about pedal 6/4s? Yeah.
The bass in the example was held for a dotted half note, but it could also be 3 quarter notes, right? That still counts as a pedal.
Yep. All right. We might skip this for a minute. Let's do, yeah. So let's do some analysis here. It says, label the 6/4 chords. Label chords with Roman numerals. Be sure to include the F sharp 5 at the beginning of measure 69. And 70 is important. Okay. Well, let's listen to it.
Self-test 9-1-A-1.
Okay. So what key are we in?
B flat.
Okay, B flat, or is it G minor? Thoughts? G minor or B flat major?
B flat, maybe.
You have sharps.
We do have F sharps, which would indicate G minor. First chord. And really all we have to do is look at the left hand for the most part as the broken chord, the arpeggio. That'll kind of give us an idea what chord we're dealing with. You have a G, B flat, D, G, a B flat. So a G minor triad. Again, this is kind of like a part of a longer piece, so we don't know if the whole piece could be a B flat major, but this is one section that goes to G minor. We don't know. But yeah, this would be G minor triad, so we're gonna start off on the G minor, does another G minor triad. What's this triad here? So we have G minor, we have a one chord, the first bar, second bar, G, C, and E flat. 164 would be, G, E flat, D, but the D would be in the bass, so D, G, B flat.
Is that a 5/6/4?
Close, get closer, not a 5/6/4. 5/6/4, 5 is D, so it'd be D, F sharp, A, and the A would be in the bass, would make it a 6/4, so it'd be D, A, D, F sharp. This is G, C, and E flat. So what's the root?
Oh, it's a 4/6.
Yes, the root is the C. So if we move the G up, we got C, E flat, G, but the G is in the bass, so it's a 4 chord and second root. 4/6/4. All right, so now we identify that there's a 6/4 chord here. Your next job then is to identify what type of 6/4. The 6/4s, again, just don't happen randomly in our music. There's gonna be a special reason for it. One of the three reasons that we talked about. Is it cadential, is it passing, or is it pedal? All right, next measure, and sometimes you don't know until you kind of analyze the chords before and chords after, so let's keep going. Next measure, G, C, E flat, C. Same chord, right? One, or a 4 chord, second chord, 4/6/4. And then G, B flat, D, back to our 1. All right, so what kind of a 6/4 do we have then? Is this cadential? We can rule out cadential right away. Why is it not cadential? Doesn't involve the 5. Right, so cadential has gotta be a 1/6/4 to a 5. All right, is this passing or is this pedal? And it's not as obvious as some of the other examples that we've seen for both of them. Right? Passing means the bass is moving by stepwise progression. Pedal means the bass stays on the same note through all 3 chords.
Pedal?
Everybody agree with Blake? Pedal?
I think so.
Okay, why do we think it's pedal then?
Well, I'm just looking at the, just the kind of, the measures.
Yeah.
And they're all starting on the same.
That's exactly right. You got, even though the bass is moving, G is the lowest note, right? And then it comes back to G, and then it comes back to G, and then it comes back to G, and G, and G, and G again. So that's your pedal, right? Even though it looks like bass is moving around, every strong beat, 1 and 3, you have that G. So that informs the performer, you know, a little bit how to play this, right? If I'm playing this and I go, it's hard not to, but you bring out the G. Right? And even though it's not marked to kind of accent the G, you want to kind of have that there every other beat like that. So yes, we've identified this now as pedal. So we're going to put parentheses around our 6/4 chords. They, for this assignment and for the assignment that you'll do, your homework assignment, they say to label them. So really, all you would need to do is put the parentheses around it, but I also want you to tell me what type. Normally, you won't have to put what type if you're analyzing like a Roman numeral analysis. Just putting the parentheses around it would be enough. But since we're talking specifically about 6/4 chords this week, pedal, I want you to tell me that this is a pedal 6/4 versus passing 6/4 or cadential 6/4. Real quick, if we look at the last two measures that don't involve 6/4 chords, we have an A, C, E flat in our left hand. Instructions say though, include the F sharp in this chord. What's the root of this chord and what would be the Roman numeral?
Is it diminished seven?
What's that?
Diminished seven?
Diminished seven. Yep. So we have, F sharp, A, C, and E flat. So this is actually a seventh chord. So seven, diminished seven. But the A is in the bass and not the F sharp. What would instead of writing seven, what do I need to write? 6/5, first inversion, seventh chord. Everybody understand what we do there? Questions on that? Alright, and then the next beat, again, if we're only looking at the left hand, you have B and D, E flat and D. But we look at the right hand, we got G in there, which would make it what chord? Is that
One chord.
one chord, G, B flat, D, so it's actually a one chord though in first inversion. And then again, it repeats the second measure of that, the last measure repeats that same progression. So seven going to one, much like a five going to one, 7 to 1. The seven, even though it's a seventh chord, is still in first inversion because it's a diminished chord. Diminished chords will almost always be in first inversion, not second inversion, not root position, first inversion. All right, let's look at this one. Label with the chords. Remember to label all 6/4 chords as you find them. All right, we have a lot of chords here. We might not get through this whole example, but let's look at a few. All right, so we're in this one, they tell us the key. We're in the key of E major. All right. Looks like the line is under the entire beat. So we have E, G sharp, B, E, B, G sharp, E, B. Only 3 notes. E, G sharp, B. E is scale degree 1 in the key of E. So even though it starts on a 1/6, the full beat, I think we would still call it a 1 chord, like without the inversion signal. Like unless we were changing chords every single 8th note, which it kind of is a little bit. You might be able to make. I mean, you could label it 1/6 to 1. I would mark that wrong. It's just, I think, since there's only one line there, we're gonna call it 1 chord. All right, number 2 is this 8th note. We got A, E, and C sharp. A, E, and C sharp. Amelia, what do you think?
It's a 4.
4. Okay. Next one, number 3, we got G sharp, B, E is being held through, and a B. G sharp, B, and an E. Back to our 1. Then we have a rest. It said don't worry about this chord, so I'm not going to worry about it. We got A, E, and C sharp. Sounds familiar? A, C sharp, E. That'll be our 4 chord. Number 5, G sharp, B, E, B. Sounds familiar. E, G sharp, B. Oh, like a 1 chord. Then we have A, E, and they have this note, the D in parentheses, so we're not gonna use it. We're gonna go right on to the C sharp, A, E, C sharp, which is same as A, C sharp, B, which is our 4 chord again. Then we have G sharp, D, E, and B. E, G sharp, B, back to our 1, this time in first inversion. Then we have F sharp, D sharp, B, well, that's a new chord. F sharp, D sharp, B. F sharp, D sharp, and B. If I move that F sharp up, I get B, D sharp, F sharp. Joey, what chord is that in the D? That's our 5. That's our 5 chord. But the F sharp is in the bass, and the F sharp is the 5th of the chord, so what's the inversion symbol?
Second inversion.
Yeah, second inversion, 6/4. Alright, so we have a 6/4 chord here. We have to label that. Let's figure out what chord that comes after that. We have E, B, E, and G sharp. E, G sharp, B, another 1 chord. Alright, so what kind of 6/4 then do we have? Is it cadential? Why is it not cadential?
Because you come into it from the 1 and you leave it with the 1, so it's like more of a passing.
Okay. Well, another way of saying it, cadential would be a 1/6/4 to a 5. This is a 5/6/4 to a 1. So that wouldn't be cadential. Then we narrow it down from there. Is it passing or is it pedal? Alright, so like Matt said, what's happening in the bass? Is it staying or is it moving?
It's moving.
It's moving. We got G sharp, which is the 1/6, down to an F sharp, which is the 5/6/4, down to the E, which is the 1. So the bass is moving by step, which makes it not a passing 6/4 and not a pedal 6/4. So we put the parentheses around it, and then you're gonna write near it, somewhere maybe right below it, probably the best place, and just write passing. I think it happens again, but we're gonna skip the rest of that. Let's listen to this one.
Self-test. 9-1-A-3.
Label the chords with Roman numerals. Alright, so this is a little bit trickier though. The last one, they put parentheses around the non-chord tones. This one, they did not put parentheses around the non-chord tones. Let's see if we can figure out what these chords are, even though we don't have the non-chord tones for us. But first of all, what key are we in? Are we in G major or E minor? Just listening to it, did it sound like it was a major or did it sound like sometimes we should be able to kind of take that out, but sometimes some songs are not easy. This one is a little bit easier to hear. You should have been able to hear that this was major sounding versus a minor sounding. If it was minor sounding, but here's major. This is what it's in, so the way it's written is this. And so on. If it were minor, you would hear this. Okay, that minor quality versus major. Again, whatever adjective you can use, sad, happy, dark, white, bright, I like dark and bright a little bit better than happy or sad, because sometimes things in minor can sound happy. Sometimes things in major can sound sad, so it's all relevant to the context. So, but yes, listening to it to major, and then also determining, all right, the first note, bass note is a G, we have a D, we have a B, that's a G major chord. All right, so what notes would be non-chord tones in this? The C? Anything else? No, we got a B and a D and another B. That C is the only non-chord tone. Beat 2, at least the first half of beat 2, we have an F sharp, which if this were still a 1 chord, that would definitely be a non-chord tone. But you have to look at what else is going on. We have an F sharp, we have a D still, and we have an A. Does that form a new chord? If it forms a new chord, then we would label it as a new chord. If it doesn't form a new chord, then we might say this is still a 1 chord, even though the bass is moving. But does D, F sharp, A spell a new chord?
It's the 5.
Yeah, so we start on the 1, then it's the 5, but the F sharp is in the bass and not the D. So what symbol goes after the 5? 6, first inversion. So I'm just gonna write the bass. There. And then back to the last half of that B, the bass changes. So we got a G, we still have a D, and we have a B. G, B, D, back to our 1 chord. And if I were labeling the non-chord tones, right now, all I'm gonna do is put little parentheses around it to show that this is a non-chord tone. At this point, that's as far as we'll get. The next measure, we have an A, a D, and a C. Is that enough to even determine whether this is a chord or not? We have an A, a D, and a C. So A, C, D. That doesn't really look like a chord. If I move the D down, I got D, A, and C. That's looking closer to a chord to me. What chord can we infer from this, even though it's not all stacked thirds?
You should have the F that you have to take into account too.
Well, that's based on the fact that this one is moving in half beats. I'm wondering, is this our full beat, or our full chord, not the half of beat 1? But yeah, maybe we don't have enough information, so maybe we'll go to the next half a beat. All right, got an F sharp, and I got a D. F sharp would complete that chord. Right there, E, F sharp, A, C. What chord would that be, Roman numeral wise? 5, 7. But we have the A on the downbeat. Is this a 5? Is this a second inversion? Well, the F sharp's the lowest out of everything, so we're gonna call the F sharp the bass note. So really, this is instead of 5, 7, we're gonna call it first inversion 5, 4, and 5, 6. Next, we've got a G and a D. And then we have C, B, A, G. Which notes are chord tones and which notes are non-chord tones? So G chord, G, B, D is our chord, G and the D, and then we do have a B up here, we have a G down there, and then so we could say the C and the A are our non-chord tones. So it goes back to 1. Right. We only got a couple minutes, but I think we're gonna land on our 6/4 chord here in a minute. We got E, C, G, C. C, E, G is when you stack them up, which would be your 4. But the E is in the bass, so it's first inversion. And then we have D, D, G, B. Or stack them up in thirds, G, B, D. Back to our 1. But the D is in the bass, 6/4. So there's a 6/4 chord. We gotta figure out what comes up after this. C, C, E, D. Back to our C, E, G, which is 4. So we have a 1/6/4. Is this first of all cadential? Cadential is 1/6/4, but what chord should come after it? 5. So this is not a cadential 1/6/4. So then the question is it passing or is it pedal? And if you're not sure, look at what the bass is doing. The bass is moving by step, not staying on the same note. If it were staying on the same note, then it'd be pedal. This is moving by step, it's passing. So again, we're gonna label this with the parentheses and write passing flow. Alright, essentially I think this is what your homework is gonna look like. I'm gonna check, we're in chapter 9. Okay. This is the one. Yeah, okay, so I want you to do page 71. That's this example here. It's asking the same thing, analysis, and then label each 6/4 chord by type. I also want you to do page 72, number 2 at the top. This was a little bit trickier. So, in addition to doing that, I want you to watch, I have it posted I have unit 2 posted now. And this is homework number 12 video, page 72, number 2. And it's that Dr. B lecture, and he goes through that example like chord by chord. So you could try it on your own first if you want, if you have the time. If not, just go chord by chord with him and listen to his explanation and see if you can figure out what's happening. Because it's a little bit it's a little trickier. I mean, when we get into music of the Romantic period, which this is, Schumann, they disguise things a little bit more, and there's more dissonance, and, you know. So, watch the video, it'll be a good assignment for you. So, page 71 and page 72, number 2 at the top. Page 71 and 72, number
So it's 71 all?
71 all, it's just one example. Yeah. And then 72, number 2. Okay. Other questions? Alright, I will still collect any homework from Unit 1, if you have anything done. And, I'll get tests back to you on Wednesday. But if you completed them last Wednesday, the grades are in the grade book. If you didn't do it on that Wednesday, I still